Hey, I'm Kerry Gashuro, and welcome to Let It Rip. We're coming to you from the CUNY TV studios in the shadow of the Empire State Building in New York City. Now, Israel's war on Gaza enters its 8th month, and many are asking whether Israel's response to Hamas's October 7th attack is proportionate, with over 35,000 Palestinians killed, a majority of whom are not only civilians, but women and children. Many have concluded that Israel is engaged in genocide. More recently, the ICC's chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, formally applied for arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant. The application for the arrest warrants also included arrests for Hamas's leadership. Now, these recent developments may give credence to student protests, which are not only calling for universities to divest from Israel, but also for a permanent ceasefire, given the disproportionate loss of Palestinian lives. Now, here to help us discuss Israel's war on Gaza is New York State Senator Jabari Brisport and New York City Council member Inna Vernikov. I'm Kerry Gashuro, and this is Let It Rip. I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on the campus protests, particularly the fact that a majority of them are pro-Palestinians?
First of all, thank you so much for having me and adding a balanced voice to the conversation. Look, I am a staunch supporter of the First Amendment, and I support everyone's right to protest and for everyone's right to freedom of expression. But unfortunately, what's going on our college campuses, and not just in New York City, has led to violence, has led to anti-Semitism, and has led to a lot of violent rhetoric. And I think that there's been a lot of misunderstanding, and there's a problem with education, where many of these kids who are protesting don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're yelling for. They don't know what it is they're supporting.
Could you give an example of the violent rhetoric that you're referring to?
So what happened a couple of days after Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, before Israel has retaliated, we've had protests that started where these students and non-students were protesting and yelling to globalize the Intifada, from the river to the sea, Zionists out of CUNY. That was some of the rhetoric repeated in their protests.
Right. But the ACLU has indicated that particularly the chant from the river to the sea would be something that would be protected under the First Amendment that you just said you support.
And the House has passed a resolution saying that it's an anti-Semitic.
Right, but even then, the House's bill, as much as it passed with the vast majority of them, has also come under the same criticism that it's overly broad and probably would not be able to survive a First Amendment challenge. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
And maybe not, but that's not to say that Jewish students whose grandparents survived gas chambers may not, be traumatized and feel unsafe when they hear chants like that, especially after Hamas has violently murdered, raped, and attacked innocent civilians.
Let me come to Jabari. What's your take on all this?
I want to start by also thanking you for having me here and saying that what the college students are doing is just so honorable. It carries a proud tradition of college campuses protesting against the injustices of the Vietnam War, against apartheid in South Africa, and now carrying that against a genocide which has claimed the lives of tens of thousands of Palestinians, many of them women and children.
Mm-hmm. But what's your take on some of the things that Inna has said, that there have been allegations of anti-Semitism, and particularly this chant of Intifada, or even, Palestine shall be free from the river to the sea. What's your take on that?
Well, currently from the river to the sea, Palestinians are denied voting rights, are denied clean water, are denied food, they are being starved, they are being shot at, they are being pushed out of their homes. And so I think it's reasonable to say that rather than being persecuted, killed, starved, that they should be free. I think that's a reasonable thing. And then in terms of the college, what their demands are, I really want to center that they're calling for something very simple, which is that their colleges disclose if they are contracting with any companies that are profiting from the genocide and divest from those companies.
So when you think about the college protests, and particularly their demands in terms of divesting from Israel and then call for an immediate ceasefire, isn't that a reasonable request from folks?
Look, I think if what we saw on college campuses was just signs and calls for a ceasefire, which is something I disagree with in terms of messaging, I think that would be fine. I don't think that Jewish students would be feeling unsafe because there were calls for a ceasefire, even if there were calls to boycott, divest, and sanction from the state of Israel. But that's not what's happening. A call for an intifada, like I tried to explain before, is a call for a violent uprising. And if we look at what the intifada was, the first and second intifada, one in 1987, the second in 2000s, those were suicide bombings. The intifada killed 1,000 Israeli civilians and injured thousands. That's what the intifada is.
But even when you talk about this call for violence, you know, how do you balance that with the fact that you have seen provocateurs, particularly with the UCLA protests, where they were very, very peaceful, and then you have folks coming in and doing the exact opposite, which is trying to provoke them into becoming more violent. What's your take on that?
The problem is that the college campus administrators cannot balance between free speech and keeping their Jewish students safe, and all students. There are other students who don't feel safe. I spoke to some students who have nothing to do with Israel, Gaza, with the conflict, who are going onto these campuses who just want to go to school and study and graduate and get a job. And they were bothered by what was happening because they're disrupting student life.
But my question to you is, and I'm going to come back to you on this, Jabari. If campuses are supposed to be the havens of freedom of expression, free speech, peaceful assembly, why is it that even if you're going to have a few folks who may be saying some things that may be uncomfortable, right, that somehow is something that they should be called out on?
Would you say that a professor who's glorifying what happened on October 7th and glorifying Hamas is something that is just a little bit uncomfortable?
Well, it depends on what the context is, right? And
glorifying Hamas depends on the context?
Right, in terms of what is it, because we know that Hamas was duly elected by, you know, Palestinians in Gaza, right? We also know that there were a creation of Netanyahu because he has been opposed to a two-state solution. And so by hoping that he can play a boss with Hamas, that somehow that is going to prevent that from happening. So this is why I'm saying that there's a particular context to it. And even then, as you're going to make the argument that somehow the context, glorifying Hamas is something that we should call them out on, what about the settlers in Israel who have continued repeatedly to make life unbearable for folks in the West Bank?
What about Hamas making life unbearable for the Palestinians? Senator, will you condemn October 7th?
Yes, I condemn October 7th. I also condemn Israel harder because it's been an October 7th in Gaza every single week since that happened. They've killed over 40,000 people. Right. Will you condemn both? Both Hamas and Israel? I
will not condemn Israel. Israel is prosecuting. I condemn Hamas. Hamas started this war. Israel is prosecuting a war, and it is inherently anti-Semitic to say that Israel is committing genocide because, number one, let's understand the definition of genocide. Genocide is when someone wants to eradicate a population based on their religion, nationality, or ethnic or a national origin. That is not what Israel is doing. Israel is prosecuting a war. Israel is getting rid of Hamas.
That's not right.
And helping
Jabari,
the world.
Let's get you into that conversation. What's your response to that?
I would say, one, it's really disturbing that the councilwoman is able to condemn the murders of Israelis but not condemn the murders of Palestinians. And she's free to interrupt at any time.
I condemn the murders of Palestinians, but I blame Hamas for their murders. They hide behind civilians when they throw rockets from hospitals and schools and attack Israelis. How would you respond?
Councilmember, wait, let Jabari finish his point.
And then I would also add to that, this is considered genocide by many genocide scholars. The international community is very opposed to this. And, it is part of the Likud Charter that Israel should have sovereignty of all the land from the river to the sea. So the combination of that being in the charter of the ruling government with starving these Palestinians, with trying to expel them from their land, and with the now right-wing movement to resettle Gaza with illegal Israeli settlements, it's hard to frame this as anything but genocide.
Now, Jabari raised some important points, particularly with Israel's response to Hamas's attack. But some people would argue, following on Jabari's point, that if you go way back to 1948 with the Nakba, which led to approximately 700,000 Palestinians being expelled, you know, that should be considered in line with what has been going on up until this moment. What's your take on that?
What about the Jews being expelled? The Jews have, look, the Jewish people have thousands of years worth of connection to the land of Israel. It's in our prayers, it's in our Bible, and all that the Jewish people have wanted throughout the years was peace. We were never the attackers. All we want is peace. And I want to talk about the charter, because in the Hamas charter, it specifically says they want to annihilate Israel, they want to annihilate the West, and kill the Jews. That is in the Hamas charter.
Allow Jabari to answer.
Israel's charter? Israel wants peace.
You asked me quite a few questions. I'll let Jabari respond.
Sure. I mean, we don't fund Hamas. We fund Israel with billions of dollars.
Because Israel is our #1 ally in the Middle East that is helping us, the world, Israel, the Middle East, get rid of Hamas.
Right, but
that is a terrorist organization.
But the conversation right now is that, one, there is no political solution that Israel is presenting with regard to its attack on Gaza. Now, there's some folks out there who are saying that
Israel's not attacking Gaza, they're attacking Hamas.
No, well, where's Hamas located? There you go. Now, one of the things that folks are saying, at least in the international community, is the fact that it is going to be virtually impossible for Israel to eliminate Hamas. Part of it is because part of what you said earlier, that it's very much part of Gaza. It's imbued into that community. It was duly elected by those folks. And, you know, it was a creation of Benjamin Netanyahu. So my question to you is, what do you think the solution is if Israel is not putting anything on the table in terms of a political solution? That even its own military generals are saying, what's the end game here?
Well, do you think we just leave it be and lay down and die? We have to fight to get rid of Hamas, and Israel has made it super clear that they are not targeting civilians. Hamas, however, on the other hand, is. This is a battle between good and evil.
False. I totally disagree. But we'll have to end it there. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll discuss the responses from colleges and universities to student protests in support of Palestine. I'm Kero Gashuro, and this is Let It Rip. Now, pro-Palestinian student protests have continued to rock the nation. While most of the protests have been peaceful, there have been allegations of anti-Semitism, which have prompted congressional hearings and legislation designed to keep Jewish students safe. However, there have been concerns that the proposed legislation is far too broad and may violate protesters' free speech. Back to help us discuss the Compass protests and free speech is New York State Senator Jabari Brisport and New York City Council member Ina Vernicourt. Welcome back to you both. Jabari, let's come to you. I know you just recently introduced a bill dealing with funding illegal settlements in Israel. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so this is the Not on Our Dime bill, which I carry with Assembly Member Zoran Mamdani, which would essentially allow the Attorney General to fine fake charities or withdraw the tax-exempt status, a nonprofit status of fake charities, which take money claiming that it's for charitable purposes in Israel, but actually use it to fund drones, guns, and the violent illegal displacement of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza.
So why the need to introduce this bill now, particularly with how powerful AIPAC is, and that they have targeted certain congressional members, state council members, in terms of how they are critical of Israel?
Well, it's always a good time to do the right thing, and if fake charities are deceiving New Yorkers and taking their money in order to create violence in the West Bank and Gaza, it is always a good time to push against that. And I would also just, I disagree with the president on many of the ways he's handled the Israel-Palestine situation, but even he has come out against the illegal settlements.
Ina, I want to come to you. What's your take on settlements in Israel?
My take on settlements is there are no settlements. There are schools, there are hospitals, there are homes where people live, where people work. And by the way, there are millions of Arabs living in Israel. Have you been to Israel?
I've never been to Israel.
I'll pay for your ticket to go to Israel, because if you were in Israel, you would have a totally different take on what's actually going on there. There are Arabs and Jews living in peace, working side by side together.
No, that's not accurate, because B'Tselem,
have you been to Israel?
Amnesty International.
Have you been to
Israel? No, I have not, but I will.
Okay, so I love
Amnesty
how
International,
people who have never been to Israel
Well,
I didn't have
Gaza and been talking
Right.
about Gaza this whole time.
Yeah, I didn't have to go to South Africa to know that it was an apartheid state, which B'Tselem.
I have lived in
hold on.
Israel.
Right, fair enough. I'm not questioning whether you
And
lived in
I
Israel.
can tell you that Jews and Arabs live together side by side, and there are plenty of Arabs supporting and standing up for the state of Israel. It is the only country in the Middle East giving equal rights.
No,
to
that's no,
giving
that's false.
Equal rights.
Here's
Can I
why.
finish, please? Giving
That's no,
equal
that's
rights.
false because at
Okay,
least
you
on
can
this
tell
show
me it's
we try to
false
be as
after I'm
factual as
finished with
possible.
what I have to say.
But when
Israel's
you think about
only
the apartheid
democracy
state,
in the
right?
Middle East that is giving equal rights to gays, to women, to minorities.
No, that's
Gay
been
marriage is
questioned.
legal.
But
I'm a gay
no,
man.
hold on.
Gay marriage is
And
illegal
what would they
in
do to
Israel.
you in Gaza? Tell me what they would do to you in Gaza. They would throw you off a cliff in Gaza for being
There
gay.
are gay people
Are you
in Gaza as
disagreeing with
well.
me? That is
Hold on.
hilarious.
No,
Have you
hold
been
on.
to
That
Gaza?
is hilarious.
Or you're just talking about Gaza
let's-
without ever having gone there?
Let's go
Oh,
on a
man.
trip. And let's go on a trip
Hold
together.
on. So what do
Gaza?
you say? Hold on,
We'll go to
Jabari, let
both.
me just get this in. So
Okay.
what do you say when B'Tselem, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch have all characterized Israel as an apartheid state? So even this notion that somehow Arab Israelis are living peacefully alongside Israeli citizens, that is essentially false. That
Are
they
those
can't.
organizations
Hold on, hold on,
condemning
hold on.
China
Allow me-
for the
no,
genocide of
no,
Uyghurs?
we're talking
Are
about
those
Israel.
organizations?
That's no.
Well, that's
we're-
the problem.
No, we're talking about
we're
yes, and we
only
want to
talking
focus
about
on
Israel.
Right.
I say
and
that
until
is
we get to a point-
anti-Semitism.
No, that is not. A critique of Israel is not anti-Semitic, right? That's one of the
It's
more lazy
not at
arguments. No,
all.
hold on. Allow me to finish. A critique of Israel is not anti-Semitic. It's a fair critique, right? We're not isolating anybody. And so this is why I think one of the lazy arguments that's made by folks arguing that anytime somebody says something critical of Israel, they're somehow being anti-Semitic. It's not. Now, back to my original question. When we think about what B'Tselem says, when we think about what Human Rights Watch said, when we think about what Amnesty International said, they all characterized Israel as an apartheid state. One of the reasons why they've said that is Arabs cannot vote in the national elections, right? It is very difficult for them to sometimes purchase property in certain areas, right? So what is your take on that?
It is also difficult for Jews to purchase property. I mean, if they won't condemn other countries that are engaged in serious human rights violations, but they condemn Israel, what I have to say about that is they are anti-Semitic. There is no other explanation. And I am okay with criticizing Israel. I've criticized Israel for certain things
But does
I
that
didn't
make
like,
you anti-Semitic
but
when you criticize Israel?
If just criticism of Israel alone is not anti-Semitic. When you criticize Israel for things that other countries do actually do, which Israel, in my opinion, I understand you disagree, doesn't do. Israel is not engaged in genocide. Israel doesn't violate human rights. Israel supports everyone equally. That is anti-Semitic.
Okay, so I want to shift to Jabari in this. You know, one of the things that you just articulated is that you disagree with the president, particularly on his policies with regard to Israel. What do you think that impact has on the election? Because we're seeing a lot of folks who are expressly saying, look, I can't support Joe Biden if he's being complicit with genocide in Israel.
I think he's shooting himself in the foot and shooting the entire Democratic Party in the foot by continuing to support this genocide. It's become a top issue in many people's minds, even in the extremely Democratic Bed-Stuy, which I represent. People are very frustrated knowing that their tax dollars are going to towards supporting this. And just to piggyback off what the councilmember was saying, we don't pay any other countries to commit atrocities in the way we do with Israel.
We don't pay Israel
send
to commit atrocities.
billions of dollars in military funding. Military funding is not school funding. It is not food funding. It is killing funding.
We don't pay Israel to commit atrocities. We help Israel because they're our ally to defend themselves from a monstrous terrorist. And by the way, it's not just one. Israel is targeted from everywhere, from all sides, from the entire Middle East.
But Ina, I just want to come back to the question I asked Jabari before, which is what do you think the impact of the Israel-Palestinian conflict is on the presidential campaign?
We're looking forward to having a Republican back in office.
Okay, so you think that Trump is going to win, is that the case?
I sure hope so.
All right, so why wasn't there the same intensity and criticism when he essentially said that there were good people on both sides during the protests where people was chanting, "The Jews shall not replace us"? Why wasn't there the same intensity, particularly with your candidate?
He condemned white supremacy 1,200 times, but the media refused to play that. That's not a narrative.
Right, but you're not answering my question. My question is, why wasn't there that same critique, right, when it came to him saying that there were good people on both sides, despite the fact that you had people yelling what can be considered anti-Semitism?
I always condemn anti-Semitism, whether it comes
why
from the right or the
yeah,
left.
but why wasn't there the same critique? I'm curious as to your
I
question.
can't speak for every politician in the country.
Did you criticize
I
him?
always criticize anti-Semitism or racism when it comes from whichever side of the aisle.
Okay, but specifically about Charlottesville, right? And if he went ahead and said there are good people on both sides, again, there wasn't the same intensity, but it seems that folks still lined up, behind him. Isn't there concern that he might not be as strong with regard to anti-Semitism
Trump
as
has
Joe
done
Biden?
more for Israel and the Jewish people than any president has done in the history. He has gotten legislation passed to support college students against anti-Semitism. He has moved the embassy. He has always spoken out in support of Israel, in support of the Jewish people, and he has done a lot for Israel, and he has had a great relationship with the state of Israel, with the Prime Minister, and the Jewish people overall feel that President Trump supported us more than any other president.
So when Trump said that he doesn't trust anybody with his money except somebody who's willing a yarmulke, what was your take on that?
I have never heard that.
Okay, well, you're not listening to what Trump is doing. But I'll come back to you, Jabari. What's your take on all this in terms of how the different candidates are looking at this Israel-Palestinian conflict?
I think that it's really important that people keep raising their voices against the genocide. We're currently looking at two candidates, both of which are not planning to stop it. And, I would hate to really distract or get too far away from the fact that there have been tens of thousands of people murdered, that over 1 million people are being starved, and now after being told to go to the safe place of Rafah, they are now being bombed there and being told to go from there when there is nowhere to go. And neither candidate wants to stop this absolute moral atrocity, the worst genocide of our time, from happening.
Right. And to piggyback off Ina's point, is it a safe bet or is it pretty much plausible that Joe Biden might lose this election given where he stands on this issue?
I think it's extremely plausible he might lose this election. There are many people who I've heard it's no longer about Biden, he's poisoned the well. They said they will not vote for Democrats at all because Democrats have been so complicit in this genocide.
Okay. Well, great discussion, but we'll have to end it there. I want to thank our guests, New York State Senator Jabari Brisport and New York City Council Member Ina Vernikov. I'm Kerry Gashuro, and this is Let It Rip. People who have been critical of the campus protests have questioned their ability to push universities to accept their demands of divesting from Israel and calling for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. In fact, many applauded the university presidents who called in the police to end the student protests. However, criticism of the protests fails to realize how successful campus protests were in the 1980s in getting universities to divest from the apartheid regime in South Africa, and in the 1960s in protesting the Vietnam War. In fact, Columbia University's Hamilton Hall was the location for student protests against apartheid, where the Coalition for a Free South Africa blockaded Hamilton Hall. The students held firm to their demands despite being threatened with disciplinary charges and expulsion. 5 months later, Columbia divested from companies doing business in apartheid South Africa. Now, while all protests may not be the same, students have understood the intersection of war, racism, and colonialism in all three conflicts. Thus, it is not surprising that they have embraced their role as the consciousness of the nation when they question and protest against American imperialism or its support of apartheid. Students have appreciated that to be silent is to be complicit in the atrocities being committed by the United States or with the support of the United States. We hope they will continue their fight against any form of injustice at home or abroad. I'm Kerry Gashuro, and this is Let It Rip.